At the elegant Fairmont Harvest Ball, two worlds collide when Henry Caldwell, heir to a wealthy estate, defies society by dancing with Lena, a young woman enslaved in his household who dared to attend in a homemade dress. Their unexpected connection ignites a scandal that threatens Henry's position and Lena's safety, as his scorned fiancée Margaret plots revenge against them both. A tale of courage, dignity, and love that challenges the rigid social boundaries of their time. Before we start this story, comment below from where you are watching us. The Fairmont Harvest Ball was the biggest event of the year. Everyone who mattered would be there, dressed in their finest clothes, ready to see and be seen. No one cared more about making an entrance than Margaret Whiteley, who was engaged to Henry Caldwell, the handsome heir to the Caldwell estate. Margaret stood in front of her mirror, admiring her expensive blue gown. The fabric had been imported from Paris, and the dress itself cost more than most people made in a year. Her blonde hair was styled perfectly, not a strand out of place. "Tonight is going to be perfect," she said to her maid. "Everyone will see that I'm the perfect match for Henry." The maid nodded silently as she adjusted Margaret's necklace. Margaret barely noticed her. She barely noticed any of the servants. They were just there to make her life easier. Meanwhile, across town at the Caldwell estate, Henry was getting ready too. At 27, he was one of the most eligible bachelors in town, or at least he had been until he proposed to Margaret 6 months ago. His family had money, lots of it, and the Caldwell name opened doors everywhere. Henry straightened his bow tie and sighed. He should be excited about tonight, but something felt wrong. He'd been feeling it for weeks now, a growing unease about his engagement to Margaret. She was beautiful, from a good family, and everyone said they made a perfect couple. But lately, he'd started noticing things about her, the way she spoke to servants, the cruel comments she made about others when she thought no one important was listening. "Mr. Henry?" A soft voice interrupted his thoughts. He turned to see Lena standing in the doorway. At 24, she was one of the younger slaves who worked in the house. She had been with the Caldwell family for years, working first in the kitchen and now as a house servant. "Your carriage is ready whenever you are," she said, keeping her eyes lowered. "Thank you, Lena." Henry smiled at her. Unlike Margaret, he had always treated the house staff with kindness. "Are you looking forward to tonight?" Lena looked up, surprised by the question. "Sir? The ball. I know my mother gave permission for the house staff to attend the outdoor festivities." A small smile appeared on Lena's face. "Yes, Mr. Henry, it's very kind of Mrs. Caldwell to allow it." Henry nodded. "Well, I hope you enjoy yourself." After Lena left, Henry looked at himself one more time in the mirror. He was doing the right thing, wasn't he? Margaret was the kind of woman someone in his position was expected to marry. That's what his father would have said if he were still alive, but his father wasn't alive. And Henry wasn't sure he wanted to live the life everyone expected him to. The ballroom was magnificent. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a warm glow over the polished wooden floors. Her small orchestra played in the corner, and the room was filled with the town's elite in their finest clothes. Henry and Margaret arrived together, and all eyes turned to them. They made a striking couple, Henry tall and handsome in his black suit, Margaret glowing in her blue gown. "Darling, everyone is looking at us," Margaret whispered, squeezing his arm. She loved being the center of attention. "Yes, they are," Henry said, forcing a smile. They made their way through the crowd, stopping to chat with friends and acquaintances. Margaret laughed at all the right moments, said all the right things. She was perfect at this, the social game. Henry played along, but his heart wasn't in it. As the evening progressed, Henry found himself growing more and more restless. He excused himself from a conversation and walked to the edge of the ballroom where large doors opened onto a terrace. He needed some air. That's when he first saw her. Lena was standing near the wall, watching the dancing. She wasn't dressed like the other guests, of course. Her dress was simple, made of faded muslin with a few small decorative touches. Henry realized she must have made it herself, probably from scraps and leftover fabric, but there was something about the way she stood there, a quiet dignity that caught his attention. She wasn't trying to hide or make herself invisible. She was simply watching, taking in the beauty of the event with clear, bright eyes. Henry found himself staring at her, noticing things he'd never really seen before. The gentle curve of her cheek, the way her dark hair was pulled back simply but elegantly, the small smile on her lips as she watched the dancers. He was about to walk over to her when Margaret appeared at his side. "Henry, where have you been? Everyone's waiting for us to lead the next dance." She followed his gaze and saw Lena. Her face changed immediately, her smile becoming cold and mocking. What is she doing here? Before Henry could answer, Margaret walked straight toward Lena, her blue gown sweeping across the floor. Henry followed quickly, a feeling of dread growing in his stomach. "Well, look who's here," Margaret said loudly as she approached Lena. People nearby turned to look. "I didn't realize the help was invited to the ball this year." Lena's smile disappeared. "Mrs. Caldwell gave us permission to attend the outer festivities, Miss Whiteley." Margaret laughed, the sound cutting through the nearby conversations like a knife. "Oh, that's what she decided to wear? Did she tear down the curtains herself?" People around them laughed. The insult spread quickly through the ballroom. Lena stood frozen, her face burning with humiliation as she felt every eye on her. Henry felt something snap inside him. He looked at Margaret, really looked at her and saw the cruelty in her eyes. Then he looked at Lena, at the hurt on her face, but also the dignity with which she held herself. Her shoulders didn't slump, her chin didn't lower. In that moment, Henry realized that the only truly vulgar thing in the room was the coldness of his fiancée's heart. Without saying a word to Margaret, he stepped forward. He crossed the space between them and stood in front of Lena. Everyone watched, wondering what he would do. Henry bowed slightly and held out his hand to her. "May I have this dance?" The music stopped. The room went completely silent. Lena stared at him, too shocked to speak. "You don't have to," she began in a whisper, but Henry smiled, a real smile this time. "I want to." After a moment of stunned silence, the orchestra began to play again. Henry took Lena's hand gently in his and led her to the center of the dance floor. Margaret stood at the edge, her mouth open in shock. People whispered behind their hands. No one could believe what they were seeing. Henry Caldwell, dancing with a slave girl in a homemade dress. At first, Lena was stiff with fear. Her hand trembled in Henry's, but as they began to move around the floor, something changed. With each step, she seemed to grow more confident. The shame that had covered her like a shadow began to fall away. "You made this dress?" Henry asked quietly as they danced. Lena nodded, still not quite able to believe what was happening. "It's the most beautiful thing in this room," he said, and meant it. Her eyes met his then, really met them perhaps for the first time. And Henry saw something there that took his breath away, a spirit that all the hardship in her life had not been able to break. They danced until the music ended. The other couples had gradually joined them on the floor, but everyone kept glancing their way. When the song was over, Henry didn't immediately let go of her hand. "Thank you," he said. Lena finally found her voice. "No, Mr. Henry, thank you." He walked her back to the edge of the ballroom, aware of ever-wide eye on them. Then, in full view of everyone, including a furious Margaret, he lifted Lena's hand and kissed it gently. The gesture sent another shockwave through the room. This wasn't just a dance out of pity. This was something else entirely. Henry turned and walked away, not toward Margaret, but toward the terrace doors. He needed to think. He had just done something that would cause a scandal, something that would be talked about in every parlor and dining room in town tomorrow, and he didn't regret it for a second. Later that night, after most of the guests had left and the ball was winding down, Henry went looking for Lena. He found her in a quiet corner of the servants' area, carefully folding her dress. She looked up when she heard him approach, her eyes wide with surprise. "Mr. Henry, you shouldn't be here." "I wanted to make sure you were all right," he said. What Margaret did was unforgivable. Lena looked down at the dress in her hands. "I embarrassed you," she said quietly. "I should have stayed hidden." Henry stepped closer and knelt down in front of her so they were at eye level. "No," he said firmly. "You reminded me what grace looks like." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small hairpin. It was simple but beautiful, a single pearl set in silver. It had belonged to his mother. "This was my mother's," he said, placing it in Lena's palm. "She was the kindest woman I've ever known. She would have admired you as much as I do." Lena stared at the hairpin, then at Henry. "I can't accept this." "Please," he said, "next time we dance, you won't stand on the edge of any room." Their eyes met again, and something passed between them. An understanding, a connection that neither of them had expected, but that both of them felt deeply. The moment was broken by the sound of voices nearby. NRI stood quickly. "I should go," he said, "but Lena..." "Yes. Thank you for the dance." With that, he turned and left, his mind racing with thoughts he'd never had before and feelings he'd never expected to have. The next morning, the Caldwell household was in an uproar. Word of what had happened at the ball had spread like wildfire throughout the town. Margaret had arrived at the house early, her face flushed with anger. "How could you humiliate me, Leaky, that?" she demanded when she found Henry in his study, dancing with a slave girl in front of everyone. "Do you have any idea what people are saying?" Henry looked at her calmly. "I don't care what people are saying." "Well, you should. My father is furious. He's threatening to withdraw his support for your railroad investment." "Let him," Henry said. Margaret stared at him, not believing what she was hearing. "What's gotten into you? Is this some kind of F-joke?" "No joke, Margaret. Last night made me see things clearly for the first time in a long while." "What things?" Henry took a deep breath. "That I can't marry someone who treats others the way you treated Lena last night." Margaret's face went pale. "You can't be serious. You're calling off our engagement because of a slave girl?" "I'm calling it off because I finally saw who you really are," Henry said, "and you're not someone I want to spend my liffey with." Margaret's shock turned to fury. "You'll regret this, Henry Caldwell. My father will make sure you never do business in this town again." She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Henry sat down at his desk, feeling strangely calm despite the storm he knew was coming. He took out a piece of stationery and began to write. When he was finished, he sealed the envelope and wrote Lena's name on it. He rang for a servant and asked them to deliver tea envelope to Lena's quarters. Lena was helping in the kitchen when the envelope was delivered to her. She stared at it in surprise, recognizing Henry's handwriting. With trembling fingers, she opened it. Inside was a formal invitation card. At the top, in elegant script, were the words, "Miss Lena, Guest of Honor." Below that was a handwritten note. "I will not marry someone who mocks you, but I may just marry the one who made that dress. Dinner tonight. Just the two of us. If you'll join me." Henry Lena read the words over and over, hardly daring to believe them. She thought about the dance, about the way Henry had looked at her, not with pity, but with something else, something she'd never seen directed at her before. She thought about the pearl hairpin, now hidden safely in her small box of treasures, and for the first time in her life, Lena allowed herself to hope for something she'd never thought possibly. A future with Henry. Lena stared at the invitation in her hands, reading it for the 10th time. Her heart was beating so fast she thought it might burst from her chest. Dinner with Henry Caldwell, as his guest, not as a servant. "What do you have there?" Lena quickly tucked the invitation into her pocket as Martha, the cook, entered the small room where the house staff took their meals. "Nothing," Lena said too quickly. Martha raised an eyebrow, but Di didn't press the issue. "Well, whatever it is, has you looking like you've seen a ghost. You're white as a sheet." "I'm fine," Lena insisted. But she wasn't fine. She was terrified, confused, and hopeful all at once. Word had already spread through the servants' quarters about what had happened at the ball. Everyone knew that Henry had danced with her, that he'd stood up to Margaret Whiteley for her. And now this invitation. It didn't make sense. Things like his didn't happen to girls like her. "Miss Lena," a voice called from the doorway. It was James, the Caldwell family's butler. His face was stern as always. "Mrs. Caldwell would like to see you, now." Lena's stomach dropped. Mrs. Caldwell was Henry's mother, the mistress of the house. She had always been fair to the staff, but she was also fiercely protective of her only son and the Caldwell family name. With a sinking feeling, Lena followed James up the BAC stairs to Mrs. Caldwell's private sitting room. Mrs. Eleanor Caldwell was sitting by the window, her back straight, her grey hair neatly arranged. She was in her early 60s, but she still had the commanding presence that had made her one of the most respected women in town. "Thank you, James. That will be all," she said when they entered. The butler bowed and left, closing the door behind him. "Sit down, Lena," Mrs. Caldwell said, gesturing to a chair across from her. Lena sat on the edge of the chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I understand there was quite a scene at the ball last night," Mrs. Caldwell said, her voice calm and controlled. "Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry for any trouble I caused." Mrs. Caldwell studied her for a moment. "Was it your intention to cause trouble?" "No, ma'am." Lena looked up, shocked by the question. "I would never—" "I know you wouldn't," Mrs. Caldwell interrupted. "You've always been a good girl, hard-working, respectful." Lena didn't know what to say, so she remained silent. "My son has broken his engagement to Margaret Whiteley," Mrs. Caldwell continued. "Did you know that?" I heard rumors, ma'am." Mrs. Caldwell nodded. "And I understand he's invited you to dinner tonight." Lena's hand went to her pocket where the invitation was hidden. "How did Mrs. Caldwell know about that?" "The servants in this house have never been able to keep secrets from me, Lena," Mrs. Caldwell said, as if reading her mind. "Now I need to know what your intentions are toward my son." Lena's eyes widened. "Ma'am, I don't have any intentions. I never expected any of this." "But you'll go to dinner with him?" Lena hesitated. I don't know. I don't think I should." Mrs. Caldwell leaned forward slightly. "Let me be clear, Lena. My son has thrown away an advantageous engagement and created a scandal that will follow our family for years, all because of you." Lena felt tears sting her eyes. "I'm sorry, Ma'am. I'll leave. I can find work somewhere else." "That's not what I'm saying." Mrs. Caldwell's voice softened slightly. "I want to understand what happened. Tell me about last night. Tell me about the dress." So Lena told her, about making the dress from scraps and old fabric, about how excited she'd been to attend even the outer festivities of the ball, about Margaret's cruel words and the laughter that followed, and about Henry stepping forward to dance with her when everyone else was laughing. "He was kind to me," Lena finished. "That's all. He was being kind." Mrs. Caldwell was quiet for a long moment. "My son is many things, but he's not a fool, and he's never been one to create a scandal without good reason." She stood up and walked to a small desk in the corner of the room. She opened a drawer and took out something that Lena couldn't see. "Did he give you this?" Mrs. Caldwell asked, holding up the pearl hairpin. Lena gasped. "How did you—" "It was missing from my jewelry box this morning. It was one of my favorite pieces. His father gave it to me on our wedding day." "I didn't know," Lena whispered. "He said it was his mother's, but I didn't know it was so important. I'll give it back." "No," Mrs. Caldwell said firmly. "If Henry gave it to you, then he meant for you to have it." She walked over and placed the hairpin in Lena's hand. "My son sees something in you, Lena. Something special. I'm not sure I see it yet, but I trust his judgment." Lena stared at the hairpin, then at Mrs. Caldwell. "What are you saying, ma'am?" "I'm saying that if you go to dinner with my son tonight, you'll have my blessing. But know this, it won't be easy. There will be talk. Cruel talk. Are you prepared for that?" Lena thought about it, about the whispers and stares she would face, about the doors that would close to her and to Henry because of her. "I don't want to hurt him," she said finally. Mrs. Caldwell smiled for the first time. "That's exactly what I needed to hear. Now come with me. If you're having dinner with my son, you'll need something to wear." Henry paced back and forth in the small private dining room. The table was set for two, with the family's best china and silver. Candles flickered on the table, casting a warm glow over the room. He checked his pocket watch for the third time. It was already 10 minutes past the time he'd invited Lena for dinner. Maybe she wasn't coming. Maybe he'd been too forward, too presumptuous. Maybe she was afraid of the consequences. The door opened, and Henry turned quickly. His breath caught in his throat. Lena stood in the doorway, wearing a simple but elegant green dress. Her hair was arranged differently, pulled back from her face but with soft curls framing her cheeks. And there, catching the light from the candles, was his mother's pearl hairpin. "You came," Henry said, unable to hide his relief. Your mother lent me this dress, Lena said, her voice soft. Was that all right? Henry was surprised. My mother? Lena nodded. She said I had her blessing to have dinner with you. Henry smiled. His mother had always been able to surprise him. Then I'm doubly glad you're here. He pulled out a chair for her, and Lena sat down, still looking nervous but not as terrified as she had when she first entered the room. I've never had dinner like this before, she admitted, as Henry took his seat across from her. I'm not sure I know what to do. Just be yourself, Henry said. That's all I want. The first course was served by James, who kept his face carefully neutral, though Henry could see the curiosity in his eyes. Once they were alone again, Henry tried to put Lena at ease by asking her about herself, things he realized he'd never known, despite her years working in his family's home. Where did you learn to sew? He asked as they ate their soup. My mother taught me, Lena said. She worked for a dressmaker before. She trailed off, not wanting to talk about how her mother had been sold to another family when Lena was just 12. Henry nodded, understanding her reluctance. The dress you made for the ball was beautiful. I meant what I said. Lena smiled, her first real smile of the evening. Thank you. I worked on it for months, whenever I had a spare moment. As the dinner progressed, Lena gradually relaxed. Henry was easy to talk to, genuinely interested in her thoughts and experiences. By the time dessert was served, they were talking like old friends. I've never asked, Henry said as they finished their chocolate cake. Do you like working here in this house? Lena considered the question. It's a good position, she said carefully. Your family has always been fair. That's not what I asked, Henry said gently. Lena looked down at her plate. If I could choose, she said slowly, I would want to be a dressmaker, like my mother wanted to be. Henry nodded thoughtfully. Thank you for telling me. After dinner, Henry suggested they take a walk in the garden. The night was clear, the moon full enough to light their way along the gravel paths. I need to ask you something, Lena, Henry said as they stopped by a small fountain, and I want you to answer honestly, without worrying about what I want to hear. Lena turned to face him, her eyes catching the moonlight. What is it? Are you here tonight because you want to be? Or because you felt you couldn't say no to me? Lena was quiet for a moment, thinking about her answer. At first I was afraid to come, she admitted. Not of you, but of what it might mean, of what people would say. But then I realized something. What's that? That for the first time in my life someone saw me, really saw me, not as a slave or a servant, but as a person. And that person was you. She looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. So yes, I'm here because I want to be. Henry reached out and took her hand. I'm glad, he said simply. They stood there for a long moment, hand in hand, neither of them speaking. The night was quiet around them, the world far away. Finally, Henry spoke again. I meant what I wrote in that note, Lena. I won't marry someone who treats others cruelly. And I could marry someone like you, someone with kindness and dignity and strength. Lena's eyes widened. Henry, you can't. I know it's too soon, he said quickly. I know we're just beginning to know each other, but I want you to know that I'm serious about this, about us. There will be consequences, Lena warned. Your friends, your business associates. Let them talk, Henry said firmly. I've spent my whole life doing what was expected of me, marrying who I was supposed to marry, living how I was supposed to live. Last night when I danced with you was the first time I felt truly alive in years. Lena didn't know what to say. This was all happening so fast, like a dream she was afraid to wake up from. I'm not asking for an answer tonight, Henry continued. I'm just asking for a chance to see if what I'm feeling is real, if what we could have together is real. After a moment, Lena nodded. A chance, she agreed softly. Henry smiled and lifted her hand to his lips, kissing it gently. Neither of them noticed the figure watching from a window above, Margaret Whiteley, her face twisted with rage as she observed the scene in the garden. The next morning, the news was all over town. Henry Caldwell, heir to the Caldwell fortune, had publicly broken his engagement to Margaret Whiteley. And the reason? A slave girl who worked in his household. In the finest parlors and dining rooms, people could talk of nothing else. "It's disgraceful," said Mrs. Whiteley, Margaret's mother, as she had tea with her closest friends. "That boy has lost his mind." "And poor Margaret," said one of the ladies, "how humiliated she must be." Margaret sat silently, letting her mother do the talking. But inside she was seething. No one humiliated Margaret Whiteley and got away with it, especially not some slave girl in a homemade dress. "We'll be leaving for Boston next week," Mrs. Whiteley announced. "Margaret has a cousin there who's hosting a series of parties for the season. It's time she met some new people, people with proper breeding." Margaret smiled thinly. What her mother didn't know was that she had no intention of leaving town just yet, not until she had made both Henry and that girl pay for what they'd done to her. After her mother's friends had left, Margaret went to her father's study. Mr. Whiteley was a powerful man in town, with connections in business and politics. "Far, there I need your help," she said as she entered the room. Mr. Whiteley looked up from his papers. "If this is about Henry Caldwell, I've already told you. The engagement is over. We'll find you someone better." "It's not about getting him back," Margaret said, her voice cold. "It's about making him sorry he ever crossed me." Mr. Whiteley studied his daughter. "What do you have in mind?" "I want you to call in some favors. I want Henry's business deals to fail through. I want doors to close to him, and most of all, I want that girl gone." "Margaret, you're talking about revenge. It's beneath you." "Is it beneath you to let someone humiliate your daughter in public?" Margaret challenged. "Is it beneath you to let the Caldwell boy throw away a marriage alliance that would have benefited both our families?" Mr. Whiteley was quiet for a moment. "What exactly do you want me to do?" Margaret smiled. She knew her fat her would come around. He always did. "First, I want you to find out everything you can about this girl, where she came from, who her family is. There must be something we can use against her. And then we'll make sure Henry Caldwell regrets the day he ever looked at her." Lena was in the sewing room, mending a tear in one of the tablecloths, when Mrs. Caldwell found her. "There you are," Mrs. Caldwell said as she entered the room. "I've been looking for you." Lena stood up quickly. "Is something wrong, Mum?" "Not wrong exactly, but there's something we need to discuss." Mrs. Caldwell closed the door behind her. "I've been hearing talk in town about you and Henry." Lena's heart sank. "I'm sorry for any trouble I've caused." "Stop apologizing," Mrs. Caldwell said firmly. "You haven't done anything wrong, but the situation is complicated." "I understand, ma'am. Perhaps it would be better if I found work elsewhere." Mrs. Caldwell shook her head. "That's not what I want, and it's certainly not what Henry wants." She sighed. "But there will be difficult times ahead if you and my son continue to spend time together." "I know," Lena said quietly. "Do you? Do you really understand what it would mean? The doors that would close to him, the business opportunities he would lose, the friends who would turn their backs on him?" Lena felt tears stingy her eyes. "That's why I think it would be better if I left." "Running away is rarely the answer, Lena." Mrs. Caldwell's voice was gentle but firm. "Henry has made his choice. Now you need to make yours, but whatever you decide, I want you to be sure it's what you truly want, not what you think is best for my son." "How can I know what's right?" Lena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Caldwell smiled sadly. "That's the hardest question of all, isn't it? But I'll tell you this, love is rare and precious. If you find it, truly find it, then maybe it's worth fighting for no matter the cost." After Mrs. Caldwell left, Lena sat back down, her mind spinning. Was what she felt for Henry love? It was too soon to tell, but she knew that when she was with him, she felt something she'd never felt before. A sense of possibility, of hope, and maybe that was worth fighting for. Henry was in his office at the C. Aldwell Shipping Company when his friend Thomas Parker came to see him. "You've got half the town talking about you," Thomas said as he took a seat across from Henry's desk. Henry shrugged. "Let them talk." "It's more than talk, Henry. Johnson withdrew his investment in the railroad project this morning." Henry looked up sharply. "What? Why?" "You know why. He's Margaret's uncle, and he's not the only one. Harrison and Williams are reconsidering their investments too. Henry ran a hand through his hair in frustration. This is business. It shouldn't be personal. Thomas laughed without humor. Everything in this town is personal, you know that. He leaned forward. Look, Henry, I'm your friend. I'm not judging you, but you need to think about what you're doing. I have thought about it, Henry said firmly, and I won't apologize for treating Lena with the respect she deserves. This isn't just about recipe CT, and you know it. People are saying you're in love with her. Henry was quiet for a moment. Would that be so terrible? Thomas sighed. You're really serious about this, aren't you? I am. Then I hope she's worth it, because you're going to pay a high price. After Thomas left, Henry sat at his desk, thinking about what his friend had said. The railroad project was important. It would bring jobs to the town, improve trade routes, and yes, make a substantial profit for the investors, including himself. But as he thought about Lena, about her quiet strength, her gentle smile, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her dreams, he knew he was unwilling to give her up. Not for the railroad project, not for anything. He pulled out a piece of paper and began to write. If Johnson was out, he'd need to find new investors. Maybe in New York or Boston, where people might be more open-minded, or maybe not. But he had to try. Whatever happened, he wasn't going to let Lena face the storm alone. Not now. Not ever. 2 weeks had passed since the night of the Fairmont Harvest Ball, and life at the Caldwell estate had changed in ways Lena never could have imagined. She no longer worked as a house servant. Instead, at Mrs. Caldwell's suggestion, she had been moved to the sewing room full-time, where she could focus on her dressmaking skills. It makes no sense to waste your talent on housework, Mrs. Caldwell had said matter-of-factly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to promote a slave to a position usually held by a free woman. The other house staff had mixed reactions. Some were happy for Lena, like Martha the cook, who had always been kind to her. Others were resentful, whispering behind her back about how she was using Henry to improve her position. Don't pay them any mind, Martha told her on the afternoon, when she found Lena crying in the kitchen after overhearing some particularly cruel comments. They're just jealous, that's all. But what if they're right? Lena asked, wiping away her tears. What if I am ruining Henry's life? Martha shook her head firmly. That young man has never looked happier than he has these past 2 weeks. Anyone with eyes can see that. It was true. Despite the growing business problems and social backlash, Henry seemed more alive, more himself, than Lena had ever seen him. Every evening, he would find a reason to visit the sewing room, bringing her fabric samples from his business trips or books he thought she might enjoy. They would talk for hours, about her dreams of becoming a dressmaker, about his ideas for expanding the shipping business, about books they had read and places they hoped to see someday. Sometimes they would just sit in comfortable silence, Lena working on a new dress design while Henry read nearby. It was during one of these quiet evenings that Henry brought up something Lena had been avoiding thinking about. My mother's birthday is next month, he said casually, looking up from his book. She's having a small dinner party to celebrate. Lena nodded, keeping her eyes on her stitching. I'm sure it will be lovely. She wants you to come. Lena's hands stilled. As a guest? Of course as a guest, Henry said with a smile. As my guest, specifically. Lena put down her sewing and finally looked at him. Henry, I can't. Your mother has been kind, but that doesn't mean her friends will accept me at her dinner table. They'll have to get used to it sooner or later, Henry said, his voice gentle but firm. I want you by my side, Lena. Not just in the sewing room or the garden, but everywhere. Lena felt her heart beating faster. In the past 2 weeks, they had grown closer, yes, but they had been careful to keep their relationship private, away from the judging eyes of society. What Henry was suggesting was different, a public declaration that couldn't be ignored or dismissed as mere kindness toward a servant. I'm afraid, she admitted. Henry moved to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his. Of what? Of everything. Of the way people will look at me, at us. Of what it will mean for your future. Henry's eyes were serious as he looked up at her. Do you care for me, Lena? You know I do. Then that's all that matters. Everything else, the business, society, what people think, none of it means anything without you. He reached up to touch her cheek. I love you. I think I have loved you since that moment at the ball when you stood there with your head held high, even as they all laughed. Lena felt tears in her eyes. I love you too, she whispered, saying the words she'd been feeling but afraid to admit, even to herself. Henry smiled, his eyes shining with joy. Then, still holding her hands, he shifted his position slightly, and Lena realized with a shock that he was now on one knee. Lena, I know it's only been 2 weeks, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Will you marry me? Lena couldn't speak. This was too much, too fast. Marriage? It was impossible, unthinkable. And yet, as she looked into Henry's eyes, full of love and hope, she wanted it more than she'd ever wanted anything. Henry, we can't, she said, her voice breaking. The law can be changed, he finished for her. Or we can go somewhere else. New York, Maib, or even Europe. Somewhere we can be together without all of this. He gestured vaguely, indicating the society that would keep them apart. You would leave everything? Your home, your business, your friends? In a heartbeat, he said without hesitation. But I need to know if you'll come with me. Lena took a deep breath. It was madness, complete madness. And yet, yes, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, I'll marry you. Henry's face lit up with a joy so pure it took her breath away. He stood and pulled her up with him, wrapping his arms around her waist and lifting her off her feet in a moment of pure happiness. When he set her down, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. I've been carrying this around for days, waiting for the right moment. Inside was a ring, a simple gold band with a small pearl that matched the hairpin he had given her. It was my grandmother's, he said, as he slipped it onto her finger. My mother gave it to me this morning. She said it belonged with you now. Lena stared at the ring in wonder. Your mother knows about this? Henry nodded. I asked for her blessing. I wouldn't have done this without it. Lena felt a surge of gratitude toward Mrs. Caldwell. The older woman had surprised her at every turn, showing a kindness and open-mindedness Lena never would have expected. We'll tell everyone at the birthday dinner, Henry said, kissing her softly. Make it official. As Lena returned his kiss, she allowed herself to believe, just for that moment, that their love really could overcome all obstacles, that they really could have a future together. She didn't know that at that very moment, Margaret Whiteley was setting in motion a plan that would threaten everything they dreamed of. Margaret sat in her father's study, listening with growing satisfaction as the private investigator delivered his report. Her full name is Lena Davis, the man said, consulting his notes. Born on a plantation in Georgia. Her mother was sold to a family in Charleston when the girl was 12. No record of her father. That's not very useful, Margaret said with a frown. I need something we can use against her. The investigator smiled slightly. I'm getting to that, Miss Whiteley. 3 years ago, there was an incident at the plantation where she lived, a fire in the main house. Several valuable items went missing afterward, including some jewelry belonging to the mistress of the house. Margaret leaned forward, her interest piqued. Are you saying she's a thief? Nothing was ever proven, the investigator said carefully. But shortly after, she was sold to the Caldwells. Some might say it was a convenient way to get rid of a troublesome slave. Margaret smiled coldly. This is exactly what I needed. Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. My father will see to your payment. After the investigator left, Margaret sat thinking about how best to use this information. A direct accusation might be denied or explained away. No, she needed to be more subtle, to plant seeds of doubt that would grow on their own. She picked up a piece of her father's stationery and began to write an anonymous note. The next morning, Mrs. Caldwell received a letter with the morning mail. There was no return address, no signature inside. Just a short message. Have you checked your jewelry box lately? Ask about the fire at the Georgia plantation. Some things never change. Mrs. Caldwell frowned as she read the note. It was clearly meant to cast suspicion on Lena, but why? And who would send such a thing? Her first instinct was to throw it away and say nothing, but something made her hesitate, not because she believed the accusation, but because she sensed a threat behind it. Someone was trying to harm Lena, and by extension, Henry. She tucked the note into her desk drawer and decided to speak to Lena directly. Not to accuse, but to warn. She found Lena in the sewing room, working on what looked like a new dress. "That's lovely," Mrs. Caldwell said, admiring the pale blue fabric Lena was cutting. "Is it for yourself?" Lena looked up with a smile. "For your birthday. Dinner. Henry said I should have something special to wear." Mrs. Caldwell nodded, pleased but also worried about what she had to say next. "Lena, there's something I need to ask you. And I want you to know that I'm not accusing you of anything. I just need to understand what we might be facing." Lena put down her scissors, her smile fading. "What is it?" "I received an anonymous note this morning. It mentioned a fire at a plantation in Georgia, and it implied that you might have taken some jewelry." Lena's face went pale. "Who sent it?" "I don't know. But I suspect it might be someone who doesn't want to see you and Henry together." "Margaret," Lena whispered. Mrs. Caldwell nodded. "Possibly. Now, I don't care about the past, Lena. We all have things we'd rather forget. But if there's something that could be used against you, against Henry, I need to know about it." Lena was quiet for a long moment, her hair ends twisting together in her lap. Finally she spoke, her voice low but steady. "There was a fire, 3 years ago. I didn't start it. It was an accident, a candle left too close to a curtain. But in the chaos afterward, yes, I took something." She looked up, her eyes meeting Mrs. Caldwell's directly. "Not jewelry, papers." "Papers?" Lena nodded. "My freedom papers. The master had them in his desk. My mother had been saving for years to buy my freedom, sending money whenever she could. The papers were signed, legal, but he kept finding reasons not to give them to me." "So during the fire you took them?" Mrs. Caldwell said, understanding dawning. "Yes. And then he accused me of stealing jewelry to punish me. That's why he sold me. He couldn't legally keep me after I had my papers, but he could make sure no one in town would hire me if they thought I was a thief." Lena's voice was bitter with the memory. "Do you still have these papers?" Lena nodded. "They're the only thing of value I own." Mrs. Caldwell was quiet for a moment, thinking, "May I see them?" Lena hesitated, then stood and went to a small trunk in the corner of the room. From a hidden pocket in the lining, she removed a folded document. She handed it to Mrs. Caldwell with trembling hands. Mrs. Caldwell read it carefully. It was indeed a legal document granting freedom to Lena Davis, age 21. It was as dated 3 years ago and signed by her previous owner. "You've been legally free for 3 years, Mrs. Caldwell said, looking up at Lena in surprise. "Why didn't you say anything?" "What difference would it have made?" Lena asked. "No one would hire me with the rumors about me being a thief. At least here I had a roof over my head and decent treatment." She paused. "And then I met Henry, and nothing else seemed important anymore." Mrs. Caldwell handed the document back to Lena. "This changes things," she said thoughtfully. "If you're already legally free, then the obstacles to you and Henry being together are fewer than I thought. But the rumors can be countered with the truth," Mrs. Caldwell said firmly. "The important thing is that you are not a thief, and we can prove it." Lena looked doubtful. "Will people believe that?" "Some will, some won't, but the law will be on your side, and that's what matters." Mrs. Caldwell stood. "Keep your papers safe, Lena, and finish that beautiful dress. I think my birthday dinner is going to be even more memorable than I planned." As Mrs. Caldwell left the room, she felt a renewed determination to protect her son's happiness. If Margaret Whiteley thought she could destroy what Henry and Lena were building with anonymous notes and old rumors, she was very much mistaken. Henry was at his office when Thomas Parker burst in without knocking. "Have you seen this?" Thomas demanded, slapping a newspaper down on Henry's desk. Henry picked it up and felt his stomach drop as he read the headline, "Caldwell heir bewitched by slave girl with criminal past." The article below was filled with insinuations and half-truths, painting Lena as a manipulative thief who had somehow tricked Henry into falling for her. It mentioned the fire at the plantation and the missing jewelry, PR assenting it as fact rather than accusation. "Where did this come from?" Henry asked, his voice tight with anger. "It's in every paper in town," Thomas said. "Everyone's talking about it." Henry stood up, crumpling the newspaper in his fist. "This is Margaret's doing. She's trying to destroy Lena's reputation." "Well, it's working," Thomas said bluntly. "The railroad investors called an emergency meeting this morning. They're voting to remove you as project manager." Henry barely heard him. All he could think about was Lena. How hurt she would be when she saw this, how unfair it was that her past was being twisted this way. "I need to go home," he said, grabbing his coat. "Lena needs to know what's happening." Thomas caught his arm. "Henry, wait. Think about this. Maybe it's time to reconsider." Henry jerked his arm away. "Don't say it, Thomas. Don't even think it. I love her and I'm going to marry her, not hing in that newspaper changes that." Thomas sighed. "Then at least let me come with you. You might need a friend today." Henry nodded, grateful for Thomas's loyalty despite his reservations. When they arrived at the Caldwell estate, they found the house in an uproar. Servants were whispering in corners, and there was an unfamiliar carriage in the drive. "Whose carriage is that?" Henry asked as they entered the house. James the butler met them in the hall, his face grave. "It's Sheriff Wilson, sir. He's with your mother in the drawing room." Henry's heart raced as he hurried to the drawing room, Thomas close behind. Inside, he found his mother sitting calmly in her favorite chair, while Sheriff Wilson stood awkwardly by the fireplace. "What's going on?" Henry demanded. "Where's Lena?" "That's what I'm trying to find out," Sheriff Wilson said. "She's not in her room and none of the staff have seen her since early this morning." "What do you mean?" Henry felt a cold fear creeping up his spine. "Why are you looking for her?" Sheriff Wilson looked uncomfortable. "There's been an accusation, Henry. Mrs. Whiteley claims that a pearl necklace was stolen from her home last week during a tea party that your mother attended. She says your girl was seen near her bedroom." "That's ridiculous," Henry exploded. "Lena wasn't even at the Whiteley house last week. She was here working on a dress for my mother's birthday." "Can anyone confirm that?" the sheriff asked. "I can," Mrs. Caldwell said firmly. "Lena was here all day, every day last week. She never left the estate." Sheriff Wilson nodded, looking relieved. "That's good enough for me, Mrs. Caldwell. I'll tell Mrs. Whiteley there must be some mistake." "There's no mistake," Henry said bitterly. "This is a deliberate attempt to harm Lena because of her relationship with me." The sheriff looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry, Henry. I was just doing my job, following up on a complaint." After the sheriff left, Henry turned to his mother. "We need to find Lena. She must have seen the newspaper. She must be so upset." "I've already sent servants to look for her," Mrs. Caldwell said. "She's not in any of her usual places, not the sewing room or the garden or the library." Henry ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "I'll check the stables. Maybe she took a horse." But the stable master confirmed that all the horses were accounted for. Lena hadn't taken one. As the day wore on and the search continued, Henry's worry turned to fear. Where could she have gone? Why would she leave without telling him? It was Martha the cook who finally provided a clue. "I saw her early this morning," she told Henry when he came to the kitchen to ask if anyone had seen Lena. She was upset, crying. "Say," he had a newspaper in her hand. "Did she say anything?" Henry asked desperately. Martha hesitated. "She said something about not wanting to ruin your life, about how the rumors would never stop as long as she was here." Henry felt his heart sink. "She's run away. She thinks she's protecting me by leaving." "But where would she go?" Thomas asked. "She doesn't have family here." Henry thought for a moment. "Charleston," he said suddenly. "Her mother is in C. Harleston. That's where she'd go." "That's hundreds of miles away," Thomas pointed out. "How would she get there?" "The morning train," Henry said, a new urgency in his voice. "It leaves for Charleston at 9. If she left early enough, she could have made it." Without another word, Henry raced out of the kitchen, heading for the stables. "Saddle my fastest horse," he called to the stable master. "I need to get to the train station immediately." As he rode through town at a dangerous pace, Henry prayed he wasn't too late. The train would have left hours ago, but maybe, just maybe, Lena had changed her mind. Maybe she was still at the station, waiting for the next train, trying to decide what to do. But when he arrived at the station, out of breath and desperate, the station master confirmed his fears. "Yes, there was a young colored woman on the morning train," he said. "Bought a ticket to Charleston, seemed in a hurry." Henry felt as if the ground had fallen away beneath his feet. She was gone. Lena was gone. As he stood on the platform, staring down the empty tracks, he made a decision. He would go after her. He would follow her to Charleston and bring her back, because a life without Lena was no life at all. What he didn't know was that Lena had made a decision of her own, one that would change both their lives forever. In a small hotel room in a town 30 miles south, Lena sat on the edge of the bed, her few belongings packed in a small bag beside her. The train to Charleston would leave in the morning. Just one more night, and she would be on her way to find her mother, to start a new life, far away from the scandal and rumors that threatened to destroy Henry's future. She looked down at the ring on her finger, the pearl gleaming softly in the dim light of the room. She should take it off, send it back to him with a note explaining why she had to leave, but she couldn't bring herself to remove it. Not yet. Not when it was all she had left of him. The newspaper article had been the final straw. Seeing her past laid out that way, twisted into something ugly and shameful, had made her realize that there would always be people like Margaret who would try to keep them apart, people who would hurt Henry to punish her. She had slipped away from the estate before Dee, Orne taking only what belonged to her clothes, her freedom papers, and the pearl hairpin Mrs. Caldwell had returned to her. She had left a letter for Henry, explaining why she had to go, telling him that she loved him too much to let him sacrifice everything for her. Now, sitting alone in that small room, she wondered if she had made the right choice. The pain in her heart was almost unbearable, a physical ache that made it hard to breathe. A knock at the door startled her out of her thoughts. "Who is it?" she called, suddenly afraid. Had someone followed her? "Lena, it's Eleanor Caldwell. Please open the door." Lena gasped in surprise. Mrs. Caldwell? Here? How had she found her? With trembling hands, she opened the door. Mrs. Caldwell stood there, looking tired but determined. "May I come in?" she asked. Lena stepped aside, too shocked to speak. "It wasn't hard to find you," Mrs. Caldwell said as she entered the small room. "There are only so many hotels in this town that would rent a room to a young woman traveling alone." "How did you know I'd be here?" Lena finally managed to ask. "I didn't. But I knew you'd be heading for Charleston, and this is the logical stopping point for the night." Mrs. Caldwell sat down on the room's only chair. "Henry has gone to the train station in town looking for you. He thinks you took the morning train." Lena felt a pang of guilt. "I was going to write to him once I reached Charleston, to explain. He doesn't need an explanation, Lena. He needs you to come home." Lena shook her head. "I can't. You saw the newspaper. It will only get worse. They'll never stop trying to hurt him because of me." "So you're just giving up?" Mrs. Caldwell's voice was gentle but challenging. "Running away instead of fighting for what you want?" "I'm trying to protect him," Lena insisted, "by breaking his heart. That's not protection, Lena. That's fear." Lena sat down on the bed, tears filling her eyes. "What else can I do? As long as I'm with Henry, people like Margaret will keep trying to destroy us." "Let them try," Mrs. Caldwell said firmly. "We're stronger than they are. We have the truth on our side." She reached into her bag and pulled out a document. "And we have this." Lena took the paper and read it, her eyes widening in surprise. It was a letter from her former owner in Georgia, acknowledging that he had falsely accused her of theft and apologizing for the damage to her reputation. "How did you get this?" she asked in disbelief. "I have my ways," Mrs. Caldwell said with a small smile. "Let's just say that not everyone is immune to financial persuasion, especially when they're facing business difficulties." Lena stared at the letter, hardly daring to believe it was real. "This changes everything," she whispered. "That's what I've been trying to tell you," Mrs. Caldwell said. "Now will you come home with me? Henry is worried sick about you." Lena hesitated, still afraid despite the letter. What about Margaret? She won't stop just because of this. Leave Margaret to me, Mrs. Caldwell said, a determined glint in her eye. I've known her mother for 30 years. I think it's time we had a little talk about her daughter's behavior. Lena looked down at the ring on her finger, then at the letter in her hand. Maybe Mrs. Caldwell was right. Maybe running away wasn't the answer. Maybe it was time to stand and fight for the future she wanted, a future with Henry. All right, she said, making her decision. I'll come home. Mrs. Caldwell smiled warmly. Good, because my son is absolutely miserable without you, and I've never seen him as happy as he is when you're by his side. As they left the hotel together, Lena felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. She wasn't alone anymore. She had Henry, and she had Mrs. Caldwell. Together, they would face whatever came next. What she didn't know was that Margaret Whiteley had one more card to play, one that would put everything they had built together to the ultimate test. The Caldwell estate was quiet when Mrs. Caldwell's Carrier G pulled up the long driveway with Lena beside her. It was late, almost midnight, and most of the household was asleep. Henry won't be back until morning, Mrs. Caldwell explained as they entered the house. He took the evening train to Charleston, thinking you might be on your way there. Lena felt a fresh wave of guilt. He went all the way to Charleston to find me. He would have gone to the ends of the earth for you, Mrs. Caldwell said simply. That is how much he loves you. James the butler appeared, looking surprised to see Lena. Welcome back, Miss Lena, he said, his usual formality softened by what looked like relief. We've all been worried about you. Thank you, James, Lena said, touched by his concern. I'm sorry for causing such trouble. No trouble at all, miss. He turned to Mrs. Caldwell. Will you be needing anything else tonight, ma'am? Just send word to the train station first thin G in the morning, Mrs. Caldwell replied. Have them get a message to Henry on the Charleston train that Lena is home safe. After James left, Mrs. Caldwell turned to Lena. You should get some rest. Tomorrow will be a busy day. What happens tomorrow? Lena asked. Tomorrow we start fighting back, Mrs. Caldwell said with determination. I've invited the editor of the newspaper to lunch. I think he'll be very interested in publishing a retraction of Todowi's story, especially when I show him your freedom papers and this letter from your former owner. Lena was touched by Mrs. Caldwell's fierce protectiveness. Why are you doing all this for me? Mrs. Caldwell's expression softened. Because my son loves you, and because I've come to care for you too, Lena. You deserve happiness, both of you. With that, she gave Lena a quick, unexpected hug, then sent her off to bed. But Lena couldn't sleep. She lay awake in her room, thinking about Henry on a train to Charleston, searching for her. Tomorrow couldn't come soon enough. The first light of dawn was just breaking when Lena heard a commotion downstairs. Voices, footsteps, doors opening and closing. Then running steps on the stairs, coming closer. Her door burst open, and there was Henry, looking exhausted and rumpled from travel, his eyes wild with emotion. You're here, he said, his voice breaking. You're really here. Lena stood up from where she'd been sitting by the window. Henry, I'm so sorry. But she couldn't finish. Henry crossed the room in 3 long strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. Don't ever do that again, he whispered into her hair. Don't ever leave me like that. I thought I was protecting you, Lena said, her voice muffled against his chest. From the scandal, from people like Margaret. Henry pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. I don't need protection from loving you, Lena. The only thing I couldn't bear is losing you. He kissed her then, a kiss full of relief and love and the fear of what might have been. Lena kissed him back, finally letting go of her doubts and fears. This was where she belonged, with Henry, no matter what anyone else thought. When they finally broke apart, Henry led her to sit on the edge of the bed, keeping her hand firmly in his as if afraid she might disappear again. I got off the train in Charleston and spent hours searching for you, he said. When I couldn't find you, I was about to start checking the other towns along the route when I got my mother's message at the station. Your mother found me, Lena said. She knew exactly where I'd be. Henry smiled. That sounds like her. She's always been 3 steps ahead of everyone else. His expression T-earned serious. Lena, we need to talk about what happens next. About our future. Your mother says we're going to fight back, Lena said. She's meeting with the newspaper editor today. That's a start, Henry agreed, but there's something else we need to discuss. He took a deep breath. I still want to marry you, Lena, more than ever, but I need to know if that's what you want too. Lena looked down at the pearl ring she still wore. Of course it is, but Henry, even with my freedom papers and the letter clearing my name, there will still be people who disapprove, who try to hurt us. Let them try, Henry said firmly. We'll face it together, and we won't be alone. My mother is on our side, and that's a powerful ally to have. Lena smiled, knowing he was right. Mrs. Caldwell was a force to be reckoned with when she set her mind to something. So, Henry said, squeezing her hand, will you marry me, Lena Davis? For real this time, no running away. Lena felt tears of happiness in her eyes. Yes, she said. I'll marry you, Henry Caldwell, and I promise, no more running away. Henry's face lit up with joy. He pulled her close again, sealing their promise with another kiss. Neither of them knew that at that very moment, Margaret Whiteley was putting into motion one final, desperate plan to keep them apart. Mrs. Caldwell's meeting with the newspaper editor W went exactly as planned. After seeing Lena's freedom papers and the letter from her former owner, he agreed to publish a full retraction and apology in the next day's paper. I had no idea the story wasn't true, he said, looking genuinely contrite. Mrs. Whiteley was very convincing. I'm sure she was, Mrs. Caldwell said dryly, but in the future I suggest you verify your facts before printing accusations that can ruin someone's reputation. The editor LEF'd, promising the retraction would be front-page news. That's one problem solved, Mrs. Caldwell said to Henry and Lena after he'd gone. Now we need to deal with Margaret directly. What do you have in mind? Henry asked, knowing his mother well enough to be sure she already had a plan. I'm hosting a small gathering tonight, Mrs. Caldwell said with a smile that reminded Henry of a cat about to pounce. I've invited a few key people from town, people whose opinions matter. The Whitneys are on the guest list. And you think they'll come? Lena asked doubtfully. Oh, they'll come, Mrs. Caldwell said confidently. Margaret won't be able to resist the opportunity to see if her plans have worked. And her mother will come, because she's too afraid of losing her social standing to refuse an invitation from me. Henry shook his head in admiration. You're devious, Mother. I prefer to think of it as strategic, Mrs. Caldwell replied with a wink. Now, Lena, let's talk about what you'll wear tonight. The gathering that evening was small, but carefully chosen. Mrs. Caldwell had invited the mayor and his wife, the bank president, 2 prominent business leaders and their wives, and of course, Mr. and Mrs. Whiteley, along with Margaret. The Whitneys arrived last, Margaret walking in with her head held high as if she owned the place. Her confidence faltered slightly when she saw Lena standing beside Henry, both of them looking happy and completely at ease. Lena was wearing a new dress, one she had made herself from the pale blue fabric Henry had given her. It was simple, but elegant, showing off her natural grace and beauty. Around her neck was a pearl necklace that matched the ring on her finger, and the hairpin in her carefully arranged hair. Margaret's eyes narrowed at the sight of the jewelry. Those pearls look familiar, she said loudly enough for several people to hear. I'm surprised you'd let her wear your mother's pearls, Henry, especially given her history with other people's jewelry. A hush fell over the room. This was exactly the kind of scene everyone had been half expecting, half dreading. But before Henry could respond, Mrs. Caldwell stepped forward. Actually, Margaret, these are new pearls, a gift from me to Lena to celebrate their engagement. Another ripple of surprise went through the room. The engagement wasn't public knowledge yet. Margaret's face went pale, then flushed with anger. Engagement? You can't be serious. After everything that's come out about her. You mean the lies that were printed in the newspaper? Mrs. Caldwell asked calmly. The same newspaper that will be publishing a full retraction and apology tomorrow morning? Those lies. Margaret looked around the room, suddenly aware that the tide was turning against her. She tricked him, she insisted desperately. She's using him. That's enough, Margaret, her mother said sharply, looking embarrassed by her daughter's outburst. But Margaret wasn't finished. "She's a thief, a liar. She should be arrested, not marrying into one of the finest families in town." Henry stepped forward, his face hard with anger. "I've heard enough, Margaret. You need to leave. Now." "Wait," Lena said quietly, putting a hand on Henry's arm. "Let me speak." All eyes turned to her as she stepped forward to face Margaret directly. "You've tried to destroy me," Lena said, her voice steady and clear. "You've spread lies about me. You've tried to turn people against me, all because Henry chose me over you." Margaret opened her mouth to deny it, but Lena continued before she could speak. "But here's what you don't understand, Margaret. Henry didn't choose me because of a dance or a dress or anything that happened at that ball. He chose me because he saw something in me that you'll never have. Kindness, dignity, and the strength to stand tall, even when people try to shame me." The room was completely silent now, everyone hanging on Lena's every word. "I'm not angry at you," Lena continued. "I pity you, because you'll never know what it's like to be loved the way Henry loves me, for who I am, not for my family name or my social status." Margaret's face twisted with rage. "You're nothing but a slave girl playing dress-up. Those pearls should be mine. That ring should be mine. Henry should be mine." "Lena is not a slave," Mrs. Caldwell said firmly. "She's been a free woman for 3 years. We have the papers to prove it. And even if she weren't," Henry added, taking Lena's hand, "it wouldn't change how I feel about her. I love her, Margaret. I'm going to marry her, and nothing you say or do will change that." Margaret looked from Henry to Lena to Mrs. Caldwell, realizing she had lost. With a small cry of frustration, she tore the pearl necklace from around her own neck, the one she'd been wearing to match the supposedly stolen one she'd accused Lena of taking. The pearls scattered across the floor, rolling in all directions as Margaret fled the room, followed by her mortified parents. In the silence that followed, Mrs. Caldwell stepped forward. "Well," she said with a small smile, "I think that went rather well, don't you?" The tension in the room broke as people laughed, relieved that the confrontation was over. One by one, the guests came forward to congratulate Henry and Lena on their engagement. The mayor's wife hugged Lena warmly. The bank president shook Henry's hand and whispered something that made him smile. Even the most socially conservative couple present, the Robertsons, offered their good wishes, though Mrs. Robertson still looked a bit uncomfortable. By the end of the evening, it was clear that while not everyone might approve of the match, the worst of the scandal was over. Margaret's public breakdown had done more to damage her own reputation than anything she had tried to do to Lena. As the last guests were leaving, Thomas Parker, who had watched the whole scene with growing admiration for Lena, pulled Henry aside. "I was wrong about her," he admitted. "She's extraordinary." Henry grinned. "I know." "And I have some good news," Thomas added. "The railroad investors have decided not to remove you as project manager after all. It seems your mother had a word with several of them this afternoon." Henry laughed. "That sounds like Mother, always 3 steps ahead of everyone else." 3 months later, on a perfect spring day, Henry and Lena were married in the garden of the Caldwell estate. It was a small ceremony, attended by those who had truly accepted their relationship. Mrs. Caldwell, of course, Thomas Parker, who had become one of Lena's strongest advocates, Martha the cook, and a few other household staff who had always been kind to Lena, and a handful of business associates and friends who had stood by Henry through the scandal. Lena wore a dress of her own design and making, ivory silk with delicate lace that she had worked on for weeks. Around her neck was the pearl necklace Mrs. Caldwell had given her, matching the ring on her finger and the hairpin in her hair. As they exchanged their vows, Henry couldn't take his eyes off her. This was the woman he had seen that night at the ball, standing tall and dignified even as others laughed at her simple dress. The woman who had shown him what true grace looked like. After the ceremony, as they greeted their guests, there was a surprising late arrival, Lena's mother, Sarah Davis, who had traveled all the way from Charleston after receiving Henry's letter and train ticket. The reunion between mother and daughter was tearful and joyous. Lena introduced Sarah to Henry and Mrs. Caldwell, who welcomed her warmly. "Thank you for giving my daughter the life I always dreamed of for her," Sarah said to Mrs. Caldwell, her eyes filled with gratitude. "It wasn't me, Mrs. Caldwell. replied with a smile. It was Lena herself, her strength, her dignity, her love for my son. Those are the things that changed everything. Later that evening, as the celebration was winding down, Henry found Lena sitting alone on a bench in a quiet corner of the garden. "Happy?" he asked, sitting beside her. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I have something for you," Henry said, pulling a small package from his pocket. Lena opened it to find a simple frame containing a small scrap of faded muslin fabric. "Is this," she began, recognizing the material. "From your dress," Henry confirmed. "The one you wore to the ball. I asked Martha to save a piece when you were making your new dresses." "Why?" Lena asked, touching the fabric gently. "Because that's the dress you wore when I fell in love with you," Henry said. "Not a dress of shame, but a dress of dignity and pride. I never want us to forget that." Lena's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the framed scrap of fabric. It represented everything they had overcome together, the prejudice, the scandal, the attempts to keep them apart. "I'll never forget," she promised. "Not a single moment." Henry took her face in his hands and kissed her softly. "To the future, Mrs. Caldwell." "To the future," Lena agreed. "Our future." In the years that followed, Henry and Lena Caldwell became one of the most respected couples in town. Henry's shipping business thrived, and the railroad project was completed successfully. Lena opened a dressmaking shop that quickly became famous for its beautiful designs, attracting customers from as far away as New York and Boston. Mrs. Caldwell, to no one's surprise, became Lena's fiercest champion and closest friend. She took particular delight in introducing her daughter-in-law in the finest social circles, watching with satisfaction as the same people who had once whispered behind Lena's back now sought her approval and friendship. Margaret Whiteley left town shortly after Henry and Lena's wedding, moving to Boston, where she eventually married a wealthy banker 20 years her senior. They visited town occasionally, and when they did, Margaret would go out of her way to avoid the Caldwells. But sometimes, people would catch her watching Lena from a distance, a strange expression on her face, not quite hatred anymore, but something closer to regret. As for Lena, she never forgot where she came from or the journey that had brought her to happiness. Every year on the anniversary of the Fairmont Harvest Ball, she would take out the framed scrap of muslin and remember the night that had changed everything, the night she had stood tall in a dress made of scraps and found the love of her Liffey. And when their first daughter was born, with Henry's blue eyes and Lena's quiet dignity, they named her Eleanor, after the woman who had taught them both what true strength looked like. "She's perfect," Henry whispered as he held his daughter for the first time, looking from the baby to his wife with eyes full of love. "She is," Lena agreed, reaching up to touch the pearl hairpin that never left her hair, the first gift Henry had ever given her, a symbol of everything they had overcome together. "And she'll grow up knowing that it doesn't matter what you wear or where you come from. What matters is who you are inside." Henry kissed her gently, just like her mother. And in that moment, surrounded by the family she had never dared to dream of, Lena knew that the dress she had once worn in shame had become the beginning of a life filled with love, respect, and joy beyond measure. The end.